Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ICAA's presentation on architectural wash rendering in watercolor with Craig Farnsworth. We're going to start the program in about 3 minutes, just to give everybody a chance to log in. And so we'll just be here waiting. We'll start the program at 1:03. For those of you just joining us, we're going to start the program at 1:03. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. We're going to start the program in just 1 minute.
Scott, you were actually muted. Would you restart, Scott?
Thanks. Except I was muted. Technical difficulty. Sorry. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Today we have a wonderful presentation on architectural wash rendering in watercolor by Craig Farnsworth. My name is Scott Fortman, principal of the architecture firm of Gibbons Fortman and Associates and president of the Chicago chapter of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. The ICAA is the leading nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the practice and appreciation of the classical and vernacular traditions in architecture and the allied arts. It's done primarily through education, publication, and our awards programs. The organization is a valued educational resource for students, design professionals, and the public at large. The ICAA's focus is on traditional principles that are universal: proportion, balance, scale, and beauty. Forms inspired by nature and the human body, incorporating handcrafted materials and art that result in thoughtfully designed spaces that feel comfortable, familiar, and inspirational. The desire for these principles is what draws us together to the ICAA and to events like this. Like many organizations, we shifted last year's programming to an all virtual format. Our ongoing weekly virtual sketching series has been a big hit. Each week we feature a new subject and provide reference images. Participants use any media or technique of their choice and then forward a JPEG file of their sketch. We then post the images on social media. I'm continuing to be amazed by the talent and creativity of those submissions. Last November, we held our 8th annual Acanthus Awards, celebrating the best in contemporary classical and traditional design in the Chicago area. If you've not seen it, I encourage you all to visit our website, or you can find it on YouTube. We've also recently partnered with the Benjamin Marshall Society on a series of lectures and have two upcoming lectures that should be very enlightening. This upcoming week, on February 2nd, will host a virtual tour of Chicago's Art Deco architecture with Kathleen Skolnick. And on March 25th, we will join Neil Harris as he presents his updated book on Chicago luxury apartments. We've got a full schedule of upcoming programs this winter and spring, including one on February 25th that I will surely have everyone thinking of warmer weather, when we host a discussion with ICAA member Ben Lenhart of his recently published book, Gardens of the North Shore, moderated by the acclaimed landscape designer Craig Bergman. Please visit our website at classicistchicago.org for more details on this and future events and the benefits of membership in the ICAA. If you don't remember the web address, just search ICAA Chicago. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Craig Farnsworth. Craig joined the Department of Landscape Architecture at Ball State University in 2019 as the Roane Distinguished Professor of Practice. Prior to that, he worked for over 30 years as a licensed landscape architect, with much of that time spent in the Chicago region. He also taught watercolor rendering and architectural drawing courses at Judson University as an adjunct professor from 2003 to 2015. In 2002, he received the E.V. Jones Traveling Scholarship for Rome Studies from the ICAA. Craig is a graduate of Ball State University and the University of Virginia, and you can find him on Instagram at Craig_Farns. Take it away, Craig.
Okay, thanks a lot, Scott. Thank you for that introduction and just an overview of all that's going on in the Chicago chapter. It's awesome to join all of you from cloudy Muncie, Indiana, and I think the snowstorm that you guys got recently is on its way here, and we should get that in a couple hours. But I just wanted to share with everybody today some of the things I've learned about architectural wash rendering, and in particular, kind of traditional Beaux-Arts inspired wash rendering. Scott mentioned that I went to a couple different institutions for my college education, and I learned about watercolor illustration at Ball State in kind of a loose sketchbook type manner. But when I went to the University of Virginia, I was introduced to a much more controlled Beaux-Arts type of system of rendering. And when I saw that, it just blew my mind that I realized that watercolor could actually be such a controlled medium and used to illustrate just absolutely beautiful renderings of architectural assemblages, basically. So I was hooked, and I embarked really on years of self-study, checking out old books from libraries, reading them, underscoring them, highlighting them, and just practicing a lot of what I was reading. Fortunately for me and for you, a lot of those books were republished years later, and I'll be talking more about them and how you can obtain some of those texts as well. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to, it's like a three-ring circus here. I've got a couple different cameras and different screens, but hopefully you're going to be just fine looking at a couple different things here. And what I'd like to do is this. So you should be seeing now just a PowerPoint deck here. We're going to be going over some of the different, I guess, Beaux-Arts underpinnings or foundations of this type of illustration, of this type of watercolor. And you can see here one of the texts that I use as a primary reference. It's called Americans in Paris by Carlian and Ellis. And it's really a great overview of the system that was employed really in the 1700s, 1800s, and early 1900s, the École des Beaux-Arts in France. And that was really, I'm sure a lot of you know that was set up as really a studio or atelier system where groups of aspiring architects would gather together and learn architectural design and wash rendering through a system of teaching and competitions. The photo in the lower left is an example of one of those ateliers. And these competitions were just that, and they were rigorous, they were demanding, and very set in stone in terms of the requirements, size of sheets, amount of time, subject matter, et cetera. And I won't go into all the details, but the idea of the charrette, the horse-drawn cart that would come down the street and collect these wash renderings at the due date was a word that, and the idea was that students were still completing their drawings and running out into the street and finishing them on the backs of the cart. That charrette system now has come into our language as being any kind of, a deadline crunch kind of rendering. So we borrowed that from the Beaux-Arts system, but the end result was, again, this consistent product. This is the age of enlightenment. This is rational thinking. This is trying to incorporate engineering and almost science into architecture and architectural design. So the materials that we're going to be talking about that derive from this are really, there are four main variables, and one of them is water. So I didn't put that on here because for the most part, tap water is just fine. But the other three main materials are pigments, brushes, and paper. And starting with pigments, a lot of times you can use watercolor for wash rendering. You can also use India, or what's sometimes called Chinese ink. And if you purchase a tube of lamp black, let's say, that would be a watercolor equivalent of India ink or Chinese ink. But basically, back in the day when this was being done at the Beaux-Arts system, architects would create their own. They would have to shave shavings off of hardened blocks of soot, basically, and mix it with water and create their own lamp black watercolor and then filter it. So it was quite a system to create their watercolor. Fortunately, though, we can just use it right out of the tube or out of the bottle and get our India ink that way. But the watercolor is another way to do it. And certainly if you're going to use color rather than black and white or monochromatic watercolor renderings, you're going to want to use actual watercolor. And then I always recommend using tubes as opposed to blocks of watercolor. It's easier to work with, it's more soluble, and travels very well. So the tube is preferred usually over the blocks of watercolor. As for the brushes, there are a lot of different brushes, but typically for this type of work, you want a natural hair, or it can be synthetic, but it needs to hold a lot of water. You get what you pay for in brushes. And the better quality brushes will hold more water and they will point better, meaning that they will come to really a needle point, which is really important when you're trying to get into tight spaces, tight areas. The number 6 is a good size brush for the kinds of work that I'll be showing today and the size, but it's always important to match the size of the brush to the size of the area that you're painting. There's nothing more frustrating in a watercolor rendering than to run out of water in your brush and all of a sudden have a very dry wash, and then your next wash is very wet, and you have a really difficult situation to manage. So I'll be talking a lot more about that, but you want to make sure that you have a good quality brush. And then the paper, I typically use 140-pound cold pressed paper. And there are a lot of different brands. The brand I tend to use is Arches, which is a very affordable, available paper. Comes in a lot of different sizes and so on. But you also want to stretch the paper or have it pre-stretched. And I'll talk more about that here in a minute too. But that's very important, so you don't get buckling or wrinkling in the paper. All right. And then, so those are the materials. And then what we do with those materials is create a series of washes. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that my introduction to watercolor was a very loose kind of scrapbook or sketchbook type watercolor wash, which was kind of impressionistic and putting a lot of heavy pigment down quickly. But the Beaux-Arts traditional wash rendering system is much more methodical, and it's really created by building up a series of washes. And those washes tend to be flat washes or grated washes, or a combination of flat washes where they're layered one on top of the next in a stepped or French wash system. And I'll demonstrate those here in just a few minutes. But those are the three major types of washes here: the flat, the grated, and the layered. And then there are some secondary wash types as well, which aren't used in a lot of wash renderings. but they're certainly valuable for entourage. And if you do plein air sketchbook rendering, then they're very valuable as well. And I'll show you some of that as well. So what I'm going to do here is go back to this. Okay, so you should be seeing now my overhead view. I'm going to double check another camera here too. Okay, let me stop that. Just want to make sure. Okay, so just double checking a couple things here and come back to here. Okay, so these are the actual materials. You're looking down on my drawing board now, and this is the paper that I typically use. As I said, it comes in a lot of different sizes. You can see here it says cold pressed, and the weight 140 pound. So that's very important. There are 3 available weights. 90 pound is very thin, 140 pound is kind of the mid-weight, and 300 pound is a thicker, heavier paper. The thicker the paper, the more abuse it can take in terms of erasing, but it also takes longer to dry. And because it's thicker, it's more absorbent like a paper towel. So 90 pound dries quickly, but it doesn't take very much handling, rubbing or scrubbing or multiple washes, because each time you put a wash down on a piece of paper, you are saturating it with pigment. And after a while, all the pores in the paper start to fill with sediment, and the paper no longer has the ability to absorb the pigment. So 140 pound is a nice mid-range size. But some illustrators will use 300 pound. I've seen that often as well, especially if you like to work very wet or with a lot of layers. So anyway, this is a kind of paper that I use. Also, the advantage of buying a block, you can see on the edge here, it's black. That's actually gum that's used to glue the pages together. And that's important because it's pre-stretched. So all of the paper inside won't buckle. If I wet it, it'll take the water but dry perfectly flat. If I don't have the edge either glued down or taped or stapled, then I'm going to get a buckled edge. And so here's a page here. You can see the buckling on it, and along the edge, it's a little bit rippled. And this is this is a good view here. You can see how that buckles. But if it were stretched, you wouldn't get any of that. You can also see some staple holes here that I've used on this piece of paper in the past. And just to wet it, and then while it's still wet, staple it into a piece of plywood or tape it to a piece of plywood or plastic board. Either way, like those political signs in the front yard, that kind of plastic board, that's what I'm talking about. And you can get those at an art supply store too. So anyway, that's the kind of paper. And then some other supplies here before I get into the brushes and so on. Paper towel, it's going to be very handy, so I want to have that nearby. But the ink that we're talking about, today I'm going to be using Daler and Rowney FW acrylic ink. And there are a lot of different inks out there, but you want to make sure that you've got something that's designated for, I'll bring it up closer here, for art use. So it can be used in brush or airbrush or pens for sketching, but you don't want an ink that's going to harden and stick in your brushes and ruin your brushes. So you definitely want it to be water soluble and that you can wash out of your brushes. A couple other things I'm gonna have. This actually would be a tube of watercolor, so I'm not going to be using this today, but this is how they come. And as I said, these are very transportable and excellent for traveling. Other things that I'm going to be using, just a spray bottle here to keep areas moist. And this is especially valuable if I've got a large area rendering. I won't be working that large today, but if I'm doing a big painting, I'll use this and just spray it on areas to keep them moist so that they don't dry out, and I can keep washing my keep the wash all wet. This is not product placement. I don't get any compensation for this, but this is a device or a product I use for cleaning small areas that I want to scrub out. So if you ever get a part of a wash that is maybe you want to lighten it, or you'd consider it to be a mistake, these Mr. Clean Magic erasers, they come in big sheets. You tear one off. I can use this with an erasing shield and just moisten it and rub out the ink or the watercolor. So it works very well. And it's a great backup in case you ever need it. A couple other things here, mixing cups that I can use these, anything will work for for this, but these are, 30 cents each at the art supply store. A couple of things, I've got some tape that I'll use to mask off edges. This is 3M micro pore tape. It's actually medical tape, but it's nice because water doesn't go through it, but I can see through it and I can see line work. And so I can cut very thin strips of this and preserve white areas and paint right over it multiple times and then lift off the tape at the end and reveal white paper underneath it. So this is a very useful product. Syringe I use to draw water. I think I've lost my focus here. So no, it'll come back. Syringe that I use to pull water out of basins and kind of control how much, rather than spooning it or that sort of thing. It's just a way to move water around. And then a sponge that I'll use to wet or clean paper at different times as well. Okay, brushes. I talked about natural hair, natural bristle. This is a Skoda brand. This is a size 14 brush. And I should mention that sizes are variable by manufacturer. So Winsor & Newton size 14 may not be exactly the same as in a Skoda 14, but they're relative within the line. The bigger the number, the bigger the brush. But this is called a Squirrel Mop, but it comes to a very nice point. You can see here what a point it comes to. And that's very useful for large washes and getting into tight areas. But sometimes this is too much water, okay? It just carries too much water on it. So that's where I'm gonna want to use some of these smaller brushes here, whether it's a 12 or an 8, or this is the 6 that I was talking about earlier. But you can see that what a strong, fine point it comes to. And eventually this will wear out and then you wanna replace it. But that's an overview of the brushes. And then as far as what I have on my table here, I'm going to back out of this a little bit and show you my overall table here. So you can see, I'll zoom in here in a minute, but I've got 2 water basins. I've got a pure water that I keep clean. So this is to always keep, my final wash of the brushes. And then a larger basin of water over here on the side where I'm going to wash my brushes after each initial wash. Okay, so I'll use both waters, back and forth quite a bit. And then a small mixing area. Now, because I'm using the ink and I'm developing a series of basins here, I'm just using a mini muffin tin. This is just a silver metal mini, baking tin for muffins, but it works really well for this use also. And let me take you through what I've got here. This is a thick, large basin. I'm not going to turn it on its side because it would spill all over, but it's a little Tupperware container filled with a mixture of the ink and water. And this is what is called the mother wash. Okay, so this is, back this out here. This mother wash is what we use all the time. This is like our go-to. This is the source for each, filling all of these wells here. And what I do then to make successively lighter ones is I'll take the mother wash and put it in this first one here down at the bottom, and then put mother wash in here, but a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less, but then put in no water, a little bit of water, and more water still. So this is most diluted, a little bit more, or a little bit less diluted, excuse me, and then not diluted at all from the mother wash. So right away, I have a gradation here of washes. And then this one to the side of that is pure ink. Okay, so there's no water added to this one at all. So I have a very dark available if I need it. All right. So what that allows me to do, then I'm going to come back here and zoom in a little bit. Try to do this. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is show you a little bit of what that can mean. And I mentioned the 3 different types of washes already. And let me just take a second here and go over what I'm going to be doing. This is going to be a graded wash that's done using flat washes. And so what that means is I really want to take the same wash, right? I want to take each wash that I'm using off to the side here and just put it down in the area. So I'm going to dip this in the lightest one, and I'm going to use, this is the number 8 brush that I'm using, and I'm just bringing it right into the corners. And I'm not trying to grade this at all. but it is working to the corners. And I should have mentioned too, and I didn't do this, but my board is actually on an angle, and that's very important. If you were to see the side of my board, try to get my hands here, this is horizontal. My board is actually tipped up like this at about a 20-degree angle. I've got a dictionary up here at the top of my board. So my board is tipped up toward me, and that's important because gravity is working for me then. Come on, focus, come on. So it's important for gravity to be coming downhill, and yeah, didn't want to cooperate there. Let's try this again. It's the great thing about moving back and forth. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Come on, there we go. Okay. I feel like I've lost the focus there. So I'm going to work this. There we go. There we go. All right. So sometimes these cameras have a mind of their own, but this is the second well here. And if you notice up above it too, when I was using the number 8 brush, right here, this last bit of water kind of exceeded the line. And if I were doing just an outdoor kind of plein air rendering, that wouldn't bother me at all. But if I'm trying to do something that's more methodical or careful, I would want to get that cleaned up. So what I'm going to do is take my paper towel and just push it right against that offending area there. And you can see it just soaked that right up and is dry now. So that's one reason why those paper towels are so handy. So I'm going to do that in a couple of places. Keep moving on here so I don't take too much time doing that. But now I'm using the third well. Okay, just bringing this water. This is back to the number 6 brush. And my paper is sloped. I'm coming downhill using gravity and using these are all flat washes. So I'm not trying to grade any of these. I'm just using the well. Whatever comes up is what I'm putting in here. And then when I get to the end, and I just clean my brush off in the pool of water there, I get to the end, I can clean this little bit of pool up and just make a nice clean edge then in these corners. All right, but you can see I'm starting to get a little bit darker because I'm using these different pre-mixed areas. I 1, 2, 3. Now I'm using the 4th one on the side, and this should be darker still. So keep this moving over and work to the edge, work to the pencil. The pencil I used for this was a 2H lead, and that's fairly common for this type of work. I don't want to use like a B or something, really soft. I don't need that, but I also don't want it so hard that I really engrave it, like a 6H or something. So it's a nice 2H lead. Seems to work fairly well for this type. Could be 4H, could be some, but something along those lines. But you can see these are getting generally a little bit, darker and darker. And then just for fun here, I'm going to put in the pure ink just to see what that does. You can see how much black this really gives us, right? This is really working right down to the edge. So you might say, well, why don't you just use this? If you're going to, if you need a dark area, why not just use 100% ink? I'm glad you asked. The ink dries a little bit dull. And the idea of watercolor is that you want to let the white paper shine through. The white paper is your white. There is no white in watercolor, transparent watercolor. There's gouache, which has some opaque white, but if you're going to use transparent watercolor, you want to let the paper come through. And the whole idea of these successive washes is that each wash builds up or lets the paper through a little bit. Okay, and hopefully in the corner here you can see I'm using this big basin of water. Then I'm going to clean my brush again in the little basin, and now I've got a clean brush. Okay. This system right here, this is going to be the French wash. And what the French wash is a series of steps, but you use a flat wash many different times. So I'm going to just take this down like this. Okay. Bring it down And I'm not even worrying about grading this. This is all using my second basin here. But what's important, if you can see this, hopefully, is that there's a bead of water right here. When I'm running these larger washes, it's really important to have a bead of water at the bottom. If there's no bead, it's too dry. And if it's dry, then when you put the next wash on, it's going to shoot right uphill and cause an issue. The other thing I want to do is make sure that I'm right up to the pencil edge here. So this is the time to clean up those edges. Don't let that paint dry, because then you're going to, it's gonna be more difficult. You're gonna have to get Mr. Clean out and clean up those edges a little bit. All right, so you wanna just bring this paint, this wash down in a nice controlled manner, even pace. I'm not going fast. I'm trying to be careful at the edges. I get to the end here. I'm just gonna clean up my edge. I'm gonna, come straight across, use the paint that's on there. Okay, maybe clean off my brush a little bit to dry it out. So you can see what I'm doing on the side of the basin here. Now my brush is a little bit drier, and I'm just going to come straight across and clean it up like that. Okay, so that's one wash, and I'll come back now and add successive washes to that. Let me go to this. I want to go back to this diagram here, because this is really an applied French wash. This is the overall rendering that you see here. But there's a detail that I've zoomed in. This is the base of this column right in this area where my cursor is. And if you look very closely, you can see horizontal bands here. Okay, in this part of the molding, and also right here, there's some very, very thin bands. And what's happening, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of a controlled approach to watercolor. Each band is a single flat wash. So the entire shadow area would receive a first wash of one value, okay? Once that was dry, a second wash of the same value would go down, but it wouldn't cover the first band. It would start at the second band and work down. The third band would start, or the third wash would start at the third band and wash down, on et cetera, until you got to the last, maybe the seventh or eighth band, where only this very bottom band was getting the final wash. The effect is a very smooth graded wash, but when you look closely, you see these little steps or layers. And this was pioneered in the French Beaux-Arts school, so it's sometimes called the French wash system as well. So that's what I've started setting up here. I've put down one big wash, and when this is dry, I'm going to come back and start number 2, and then number 3, and number 4, and number 5, and do my washes like that. Okay, the third kind of wash I want to do is a graded wash. And this is going to give us a similar effect to the French wash, but it does it all in one fell swoop. So I'm going to start by using clear water, and my brush is really loaded. You can see here, there's no point. See how much water is on there. I'm going to bring this into the paper, okay? And I'm just going to lay it down. And I want to make sure that I'm looking at the glistening light here. I want to make sure that the water is not just damp on the paper, but it's actually wet, okay? So I can see that there's no dry areas on this water, and I've brought it down about as far as this line right here. Now I'm going to use number 1 here on my wash. You can see that it's just barely adding some value to it, and I'm only touching the bottom part of the wash. I'm not coming back to the top. I'm only picking up that bead of water. That's where I'm mixing it, okay? Then I'm going to take number 2 here and put it in, and you can see that it's gotten a little bit darker, but because of gravity and because I'm only touching the bead, I'm not getting water moving uphill. Okay, it's still flowing down for me, and it's moving nicely in this downhill direction. Okay, now I'm going to use number 3, and you can see that it's darker still. Okay, so it's coming down, and I just want to keep it nice and consistent speed and bring it into the bottom here. And I'm going to use my bottommost area and add that. And you can see that just by mixing it onto the bead of paint that was there, I'm getting a nice little bit of gradation, right? A little bit of transition from value to value. And so right at the end here, I want to clean off my brush as far as taking some water off of it, clean my brush. I'm going to dry it on my paper towel. So it's pretty dry, And then I'm going to come back on here and I'm just going to clean up that edge. And you can see it just soaks up the water, just draws it right up back into the point. And now I can get right into the edge. Okay. Now I'm going to leave this to dry as well. But you can see the difference between these three different methods of putting down watercolor. Flat washes that are already stepped, those same steps, but all fused together. And then this wash that we're going to add the same value repeatedly in a stepped fashion. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to these, but I want to just give these a chance first to dry. So while I'm letting those dry, actually, you know what? I'm gonna let those do that. Let's come back to this. Okay. Like I said, it's a 3-ring circus here, and I want to work back and forth between a couple of things. But this is the painting that I'm actually going to start working on. And I'm going to use the types of washes that I just demonstrated and do those on this painting. So swap out here. So this is a door, obviously, and it's a measured drawing of that door. And that's what I've done here. When I do this, this view here, you can see on my table, I've got a measured drawing. Okay. And as far as process, what I did is when that drawing was done, I put a piece of trace over the top of it and then did a value study. And that's what you're seeing right here. So this value study then is graphite on trace paper. And so I'm going to use this as kind of a blueprint or a roadmap for me when I'm rendering this drawing. But a couple of things I want to point out. It's not only a value study, but it's also, I've made notations on here of a couple types. These numbers are relative values. So a 0 up here in the upper left corner is basically no wash at all. Okay, it's just pure water. But these darker numbers then, a 1 is going to be a wash, a 2 is a little second wash, and a 5 would be 5 washes. But it's also values within a wash. In other words, this arrow right here is telling me, Craig, don't make this just a number 3 or a number 4, but make it a graded wash from a 3 to a 4. Okay, so the arrow is going from dark up to light. And what I'm implying there is that there's going to be some bounce light on the bottom side of this overhang, this eave. Okay, and it's casting a shadow. So I've got this front elevation, maybe I should have described this too, but the front elevation and then the side elevation of the same door. And then I'll have a little title block down here in the corner. So these elements I'm going to render as a composition. And it's sort of like an analytique, which I'll get into in a little bit, but it's also a little bit, it's not quite a full analytique. All right. So anyway, this is going to be my roadmap here that I'm going to use going forward. And let's go ahead and just get started on that. So I'm going to bring it back to full screen. And a couple things here. You can see the pencil work. All right. I've also taken some masking tape and just masked off this so that it doesn't, I can just work my washes right over, and I'm going to get a nice crisp line around the edge when it's all done, which is nice. But I'm also going to bring this up here so you can see, because one of the things that I want you to see are these limits of the shadow. I've actually drawn in blue pencil, if you can see that. Okay, and this is something that it was done different times. Actually, it could have been inked in blue instead of penciled in blue, like I did. Okay, come on, focus. But what that does is, with all the line work on here, sometimes it gets a little confusing to see where the shadows are and where the lines are. All right, and so this gives me a good reminder of the limits of those shadows. Okay, so first wash I'm gonna do here. My blueprint tells me, let me do this here. Okay, so my blueprint is telling me that I've got this scenario where I want to start light up here and get darker as I come down. Okay, so I'm going to take my first wash, and for this it's pretty big, so I'm going to use my number, what is this, a 12 brush. Okay, for the first wash, and I'm going to use clean water, so that's up here at the beginning. Okay, I'm just going to get this water right on here. Okay, take my glasses off so I can see what I'm doing, and Okay, get this water right on here. And again, I want this wet. I don't want it to be a dry wash. So I can see a bead of water on here, okay? And I'm gonna transition pretty quickly to my first value here. And I'm going around the area that I want to keep light. I want to preserve that light, okay? And as I move away from the this light in the upper right, left corner, I'm going to bring my, start introducing the values. Now I'm going to switch back to a different brush here, okay? Because I want to get into right along these edges, but I want to preserve that white of the top of the barrel vault, okay? Because my value was saying I don't want to lose that. So I'm being very careful with a finer brush here. So you can skip back and forth between brushes, okay? And as I'm bringing this down, I want to avoid areas that are going to be darker, okay? Excuse me, avoid areas that are going to be lighter. I want to get all the areas that are going to be darker. So if on my value study, it said it was going to be a, it was going to be anything more than a 1, I want to be getting it now, okay? So these areas that are going to end up being light relative to their backgrounds, I still want to get them, okay? I still want to pick them up now and make sure that I'm getting these areas, okay? So all of these are being picked up. And I want to keep my water pretty wet. And you see up in the upper left corner, there's still that big bead of water there. And I haven't gone back to pick that up yet. I'm not as worried about that one. Okay, I want to get all these areas here established. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to come back in here to this area underneath the door. Okay, and I'm going to grab all of these areas here. Okay, and I was talking and not paying attention, so I got paint in a place where I didn't want it. Okay, now I'm working all this down like this, still with wash number 1. All right, bringing this wash down. Anything that's going to be of you know, darker, I want to keep a nice bead of water going on here. Okay, and you can see how big this bead of water is that comes right through here. Let's pick this up, make sure I'm close to that, coming across underneath. Okay, so now I've connected those beads of water, and let's get this coming down. And I want to get this little bit of shadow right here. Okay, now I'm going to come back up here and pick up this area and bring it down. Okay, now I can work a little bit faster, so I'm kind of out of some of that tight area. And I can bring this across. Okay, now I've got some interesting opportunities here. As I bring this bead down, I can actually add a second value, right? Because on my value study, I talk about getting darker as I move down into this lower corner. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start to add a value. So I'm doing not just a flat wash like I was at the beginning, but I'm actually doing a graded wash now on these areas. So the only thing that I've preserved in pure white are the areas right here on this fascia and on the barrel vault. Okay, everything else is getting this little bit of you know, some sort of wash on it. Okay, now before I leave this, if I want to pick up or clean up this bottom bit of water here, I don't want it to stay on there, get too dark. So I'm going to just pick up some of that so that it doesn't you know, get too doesn't bleed uphill. Clean both my brushes, make sure that they're ready to go for the next wash. All right, and then just take my paper towel here. Just going to clean up the edge. Okay, just get some of this moisture off. I'm not touching the paper. I'm just going right around just to pick it up so it doesn't get tracked onto the drawing maybe later on. Okay, so my first wash on here was 0. These are zeros. This is 0. Okay, and then I've got everything else around brings this wash down. Okay, watercolor always it oftentimes dries a little bit lighter than it goes down. Okay, so you don't want to undershoot here. But the nice thing about this style of rendering is that you can keep building up the layers, keep building up the washes. Okay, so I'm going to set this one aside. And I've got it on a table behind me where it's on that same angle. Okay, so it's going to continue to feel or continue to behave well, hopefully. All right, come back to my number 8 brush here, and I'm going to add a second wash now to this area right here for my French wash, my stepped wash. But you can see what I'm doing is I'm only starting at number 2. I'm not going all the way up to the top here. Okay, and I'm going to take this. So remember, this is a flat wash again. Okay, flat wash that's coming down like this. Okay, so get all of that, and then I'll just clean it up down here. Maybe switch brushes. I had to stop talking because the other brush was in my mouth, which I do more often than not. All right. Okay. Also, because the paper is a little bit rippled, there's a downhill, there's a valley right here, and some of the paint got down in that valley and didn't flow all the way down. I'm not going to worry about that now. If I were doing this for real, I would have stretched the paper and this would all be taken care of. But we'll just leave that and see what happens. All right. Now I'm going to come back to this wash. And again, I should mention this. You don't want to be putting a second wash on these if the first wash isn't dry. And the way I check that is I just use the back of my hand. Okay, so I'll just put my hand down, and if it's cool, then I know it's wet. All right, but if it's relatively air temperature, feels the same as this paper over here, then it's okay to put that second wash on. All right, I don't use the pads of my finger because those tend to be a little more oily than the back, and I don't want to have a lot of oils, in the paper. So I keep my paper clean, and I just use the side of my hand like that. Okay. So I'm going to use clear water again. Remember, we started that on this wash. I'm going to put a second graded wash on this one. So I'm going to start with clear water and bring it over. Okay. Getting a nice bead of water going here. So it's wet all the way around at the top here. And then I'm going to start with pool number 1 and just bring that right on down. Okay. And it's a good idea to try to change the point where you leave one value and pick up the next. So I shouldn't always have, make this the transition between the first 2, and then this is the transition between the second 2. I want to try to vary that line a little bit. And that's just so I don't get these little horizon lines between each transition from pool to pool. So you kind of want to mix that up, kind of shift those horizons up and down a little bit. All right. Let me see here. I think I did 2 already. Let's go now to number 3. We'll see. Yeah, this feels right. Okay, so I'm in the third one and bringing that down, trying again to stay close to these edges. Okay, taking care to not be over the line. And then I'm going to use the mother wash. All right, so this is the 4th one here, and bring that down like this. Okay. And there's a lot of pigment on this brush right now. So I can just feel that. So as I bring it across, it's leaving me with a nice dark area here. Okay, so that's my second wash. And I've got, again, from 0 through 4 is giving me a graded wash. This is doing the same thing, but it's going to use steps to get there. All right, so it's much more controlled. And then, of course, we haven't revisited this. This is more of just my reference key to remind me of how light and how dark I can be. One of the drawbacks in watercolor, or one of the challenges, that's not a drawback, but a challenge, is that to be successful as a watercolor, you need to have this range of values, right? You've got to make sure that you're not leaving it too light. And so you want to be sure and have be going from this kind of 0 all the way through to a darker value. So I'm going to go to this and then talk about something else here while we're waiting for some of this paint to dry. And I mentioned earlier this idea of an analytique, and that is the French way of saying it's an analytic or analysis of an architectural drawing, but it's basically taking all the elements of a facade, breaking them apart and recomposing them in a way that creates a new pleasing arrangement. And it takes a lot of different components from the facade and tests the relationships or looks at the relationships at a variety of scales. So it's no longer all drawn as one elevation, but it's a series of elevations or plan views that are juxtaposed with each other. And I think they're beautiful. It's one of the most captivating parts of this for me. And I love analytiques. And what I've done is kind of identify what I call 4 C's. You know, I had to be alliterative here, right? So there's 4 C's of identities or aspects of an analytique. And we're going to go over those quickly: is the character, the components, the composition, and the chronology. And I should have mentioned too that this whole slide deck will be available at the end of the show here. ICAA will make it available to participants in this webinar. So you don't have to worry about taking notes on all this, or just kind of sit back and relax, and you can get the notes later. But anyway, as far as the analytic goes, or analytique, the first idea of what goes into the character, and this is just a montage, again, of architectural features at a variety of scales, but I think it tells a story, right? It's not just the elements, but it tries to evoke some of the character or quality, the essence of what the design is all about. And it's really also, I think, a well-crafted piece. It's beautifully drafted. It's an illustration. It employs sciography, which is shadow casting, kind of the science or study of casting shadows. And so all those elements come together into just a wonderful exposition. The components that are typically in an analytique are the elevation, kind of an overall elevation, and maybe an overall plan at the same scale as the elevation. And then detail elevations, different component parts, maybe a section view, an order problem, the Corinthian or the Ionic or the Doric or Tuscan order that might be employed in the elevation. Elements that are drawn from the like a corbel or something taken off of the elevation. Entourage, meaning this might be people or plants or clouds, atmospheric conditions. Oftentimes there's some sort of descriptive text and a graphic scale. And then finally, as I mentioned, the shadow casting, which is traditionally coming from the upper left at a 45-degree angle. And that allows for this rational, uniform, consistent approach to shadow casting throughout all the drawings. And I mentioned that being a hallmark of the Beaux-Arts school. And so this consistency is so important. These drawings were done with a T-square and a 45-degree triangle. I mean, that was basically, and then a pen. So that was the toolkit that these architects worked with. And so by having all these shadows cast at 45 degrees, you can really start to understand what's happening. And looking between the plan and the elevation, you can actually project using descriptive geometry where those shadows would go. And I'll come back to that here in a minute. So the composition then is this new montage that I mentioned, where you might have an elevation being a focal point in the distance, kind of an overall elevation that is then surrounded by these framing devices, these larger scale cornices or balustrades, lintels, etc. Some foreground elements, maybe it's a broken fragment of pottery or a shard or some sort of parchment that has a plan view on it. The draftsmanship, the intentional overlap and adjacency and juxtaposition of these elements is so important, because you're trying not only to show objects, but you're setting them up in a way that the dark shadow of one will highlight the highlight of another that's in front of it. So you're always thinking about relative values, relative light and dark areas, and how can you use those to your advantage? Darks behind lights or lights behind darks as you're doing this. And so you start to see that as you're drafting it. As I mentioned, text is part of it, and then shade and shadows would be at the end. So how do you approach a drawing like this? Because it seems complex, right? It seems like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of bullet points on that slide. Okay, well, this is how I typically attack them. And I use the analogy a lot that it's like a game of chess, that you want to think. So shout out to Queen's Gambit, right? If you're thinking about a game of chess, you're thinking about strategy. You're thinking about several moves ahead. And that's really what you're doing in a watercolor. You can't just attack one of these without a game plan. You need to understand that you want to break it up into manageable pieces. And the first piece that I do is separate the planes. In other words, make the background different than the middle ground, which is different than the foreground. Separate those. And typically, if I were doing this, I might put a wash over the entire drawing except the highlights, like I just demonstrated. And then I would do a second wash on the midground and the foreground, and then a third wash just on the foreground. Okay, so I've already separated those planes. Then within each plane, this is number 2, within each plane, I would model or shade the basic form. So if I have a column, I would make a cylinder. So the shaft of the column now reads like a cylinder. Okay, I could use graded washes or stepped washes to do that. But within a plane, I have started to model the forms. All right. Then within those forms, I'm going to model the details. So once I have the basic cylinder shape of the capital or the column done, then I might go into the capital and start to render the actual, the egg and dart motif that would be in the Ionic, for instance. And so I would start to render those third, okay? But that's after there's an underlying shade and shadow that's made that part, the capital, the cylinder, right? So that's there first in number 2. Number 3 models the detail within it. And then finally, the shadows are cast. Okay, so those come on at the end. And if you do those earlier and then work over the shadow, you're going to lose the crispness of them, because every time you put a wash over an earlier wash, you lift off some of the sediment or some of the pigment that's been deposited on the paper. And by lifting it off, it gets redeposited elsewhere on the drawing or elsewhere on the painting. And that's why you don't want to have a heavy wash with a lot of pigment on it and then put a new wash over the top of that. You want to have your darkest washes come on at the end. And that's what you're going to do when you cast your shadows. All right, so that's kind of the overall approach with that chronology. So using that as a framework now, let's come back to this. And already you can see a little bit of difference here between the highlight, that I didn't paint right here, these arms, and the overall background. There's a light cast here that's in the background. But if you recall now, I want to add my second wash. So I'm going to try to avoid some of these areas that were number 1, which were right in here, and really add number 2 as it comes down. So to do that, I don't want to just start right here. Okay, I don't want to just pick up where my number 2 is. Okay, and let me go back to well, hope if you can remember that, but here's what that looked like. So let's do it this way. So you can see here that I've got the secondaries values down here, but if I just start my wash halfway down the wall, I'm going to get a line there. So I have to start up at the top and bring that down, but I'm going to bring it down with clear water. All right. So the first time I had clear water that came from here to here. Now I'm going to bring clear water from here all the way down to here, and then I'm going to introduce my next pigment. Okay, that's going to allow this to have a nice smooth gradation from top down. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start with my wash. I'm doing the same thing that I did before, where I'm going to try to avoid these areas that I want to keep white. But I'm doing this with a lot of water because I don't want it to be dry. Okay, I've got to have something here that works all the way around. And I'm going to change already to my number 6 brush here. And I'm going to start to use, even though I'm trying to get down to those number 2 areas, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this one here as well. Okay, because I want to do a graded wash right here going this way. I don't want to lose this time with only making it darker down below. I also want to make it darker on the right side of this painting. All right. And so each time I'm doing one of these washes, I'm going to try to do a graded wash along the excuse me. Oh, I want to do the shadow too. I should pick that up. So let's grab that and then come down like this. Okay. And avoiding these areas. As I said, you can always make watercolor, always the relative term, but you usually can make these values darker, right? So if you find that you didn't get it quite the value that you wanted, well, that's okay. You can just come back a little bit later and kind of darken that up. So I'm trying to grab the shadows as well as the light areas here on this side. All right. So let's get this going here. Okay. Bring this down relatively quickly. And let this then, actually, I want to leave that white. I'm gonna keep this light up here to make some good reflected light. So I'm just using clean water on the underside of this overhang. Okay, I'm going to bring that clean water down now and start to introduce some of the value now. All right, and bring it down to here and pick up underneath. All right. Okay. And yeah, let's do that. Get a little bit of clean water in a couple places there. I'm going to want that glass to read like glass, so I didn't want it to be a constant even value right here. I wanted to introduce a little bit of, what's the word? A little bit of clear water there so that I could preserve a little bit more of that light area. Okay, there we go. Pick those off. All right, so keep this coming down. And now I've got a lot of water on this, but that angle is keeping it from running uphill. I'm going to make sure that I've got this number 2, okay, running in here. And now, though, I'm going to start to avoid some things down here in the corner. Okay, I want to get the this ribbon wash, but I want to avoid some highlights on it in the corners. So I'm going to work around some of these areas here. All right. And trying to just leave some highlights that might be useful to render a little bit later on. All right, so I've avoided some little areas here. Again, I'm using a number 6 brush on this. And let's bring this over here. Clean up this here so I don't smear it. It was off the painting, so it didn't really make a difference. But okay, and then let's keep this coming down like this. All right. Okay, and okay. Now I can go ahead and push. This is all very wet up here still, so I'm going to go ahead and push some of this value instead of just letting it dry as it is. I'm going to come back in now and add a little bit of stippling to some of the darker areas. Okay, areas that I want dark, but I'm not going to worry about this being an even wash. It's going to diffuse and make it even on its own. All right. So I'm looking at my value study here. I want to have some areas here that might be a little bit darker. The other thing is I've got some brick up here too, right? Which is going to be modeled a little bit later. So I want to go ahead and let that be working as well. So let's see how we're doing here. Maybe a little bit more value. And now I'm going to come into my mother wash and add some value with that. Okay, again, still in the corners, letting it just work its way around, not trying to program or figure out where everything's going to be darker on this, but just using it as a stipple to diffuse and create a nice value here as I move around. All right, now this is pretty wet down here, and I don't want to let that sit, or else it's just going to bleed uphill. So I want to kind of pick that up now. So I'm just going to move my brush and just pick up a lot of this at the very, very bottom. I don't want to be in the middle of the painting. I don't want to be up here because I just put it there, but right at the very, very bottom, I'm going to pick it up, and it's going to keep flowing down, but it's going to be the right amount of the right amount of wetness there, so that it doesn't seep back uphill. Okay, but you can also see perhaps I've got some little light white areas here that I've started to leave, and I'll continue to do that as I get into these brick areas. Here a little bit. Okay, so let's let that dry, and I'm going to bring this. Okay, kind of clean those up right now, and let me dry this off here a little bit too. Make sure that I'm not leaving too much on that edge. All right, clean off my brush on the right, clean it off again on the left so that this brush is nice and clean, ready to go. I'm going to swap it out and put it to the side, and now bring this one back. All right, and let's just quickly add another value to this, another wash to this stepped wash, this French wash. So I'm going to do this and bring it down like this. All right. Bring it all the way to the end. And again, this is the number, what is this? The number 8 brush. And then for those of you that guessed that it was in my mouth, you were right. All right, so that's the third one now, and I'm gonna let that dry. But while that's doing that, let's come back over and do this wash again. All right, and actually I think I was using the larger brush, wasn't I? All right, so get a nice bead of water going on this one and just bring it down. So this one I'll start a little bit sooner, I think. So again, so I don't get that horizon, I'm only going to mix it on the bead. I'm not going to go up too high with it. Okay. So I'm just touching where it is, trying to get right up to that pencil line, keeping it nice, consistently wet, but there's a nice consistent bead of water right there. Okay. And then it's still coming down. And this is my third well, and now I'm going to use the mother wash and bring it up a little bit higher. You can see I started this one a little bit sooner on this wash. Again, I'm trying to move that horizon around a little bit, and it's very wet here, and so I'm going to clean it off on my well down here in the corner. Okay, put some of it back in, then clean my brush off in the upper right, keep it or clean it in the upper left, and then come back to my other brush, my smaller brush, dry it off here a little bit, and now just clean up this little bit. So I'm not using a big brush right at the end. I came back to a smaller one because it points better, and I can get right into that corner down there now. You can see now that I've got, what is this, 3 washes, or 3 washes. They're all graded, and I'm starting to approximate what the mother wash is doing, but it's got a lot more life in it. It's got more vibrancy in the paper underneath, and that's good. That's where I want to head, with this. All right. While I've got this here, let me show you a couple other things. This one is going to be what's called wet in wet. So this is one of the secondary washes, but this is useful if I want foliage or I want sky, clouds, or I'm doing plein air painting, something like that, where I might just lay down an area here that's got some clear water, and then maybe stipple in a little bit of a second value. Okay. So I'm working in kind of these underlying values that I'm gonna start with, kind of build up some different areas here. Okay, then I'm gonna soften some of these areas up front or up top, and let the paint kind of bleed uphill here a little bit. I want to avoid things like this, that little perfect round. I want to break that up a little bit, and it's still wet enough that I can touch that, and it'll start to move around. Okay, let's bring in some of the mother wash here and put wet in wet like that. Okay, and you're going to start to see it move. Okay, and start to make of its own patterns. And it's a little bit shocking at first if you're trying to really control it, but if you're used to it, you know how wet the paper is, you can start to use that to your advantage and not be concerned that somehow it's too much value, because it's still light enough. Okay, this is still wet enough, I should say, that the paint is going to move around, the ink is going to move, and it's going to be a very very nice effect. Now down here at the bottom where it's so wet, I'm drying my brush off. Okay, and I want to kind of approximate the amount of value, or excuse me, the amount of wetness that's in here. Okay, and start to work dark to light. You may notice that most of the washes I've been doing, like this one, were light to dark because the pigment flowing downhill. but you can go dark to light with the light being downhill, as long as you're not working too wet. And that's what I'm doing right now. You can see that in this corner, by using basically a much moister, drier brush, I'm able to bring moisture down to the bottom line, but it's not wet, it's just moist. And so this paint isn't rushing down to the bottom edge here. It's staying put a little bit better. So if you can kind of see what's happening there, all right, it's still moving around, but you're getting some nice atmospheric effects. This area right here, I'm gonna try something else too. And this is where it gets sometimes a little bit of an experiment, but I think it's still wet enough, and I don't put much pigment on. Okay, but I've worked it up against that little white area, so I really get a lot of contrast right here. Okay, and it was wet enough that I could put a brush that had pigment on it without being very wet. If it was a super wet brush, it would spread all over the place and cause a mess. But because it was the same dampness on my brush as what the paper was, I was matching those two, I was able to get pigment back on the paper and not create a mess. So that matching of how wet the brush is to how wet the paper is, that's really critical. And you have to look at this, you know, when I've got my papers tipped like this, my light is at an angle where I can see glistening on the paper surface. And I want to see that glistening so that I understand you know, how wet it is. I've got to see if it's moist or if it's wet. And these other ones, I can see it's dry and damp, but not almost dry, and then a little bit moist here, and this is wet. So I'm just moving across here, and I can see those differences based on how light is hitting it. And maybe, you know, in my phone camera over here, you can see that as well. Okay. So I'll just, whoops, that was too much paint there. Forgot that my paintbrush wasn't clear. It actually had paint on it. So I have to dry it off. It's almost completely dry, and I can clean off that last bit. Okay. All right, let's go back now. How's my other? Yeah, that painting is still.
Hey, Craig,
Yeah.
Can I interrupt you with a question?
Yeah, sure.
We have a question. Any thoughts on water soluble pencils? Have you used them before? And if so, any recommended methods?
I have used them, but they're okay for sketching, but I wouldn't use them for studio work. I think that they tend to be grainier. They don't give you the kind of large, flat, even washes that you can get this way with a brush. So they tend to be more, you know, it's basically, well, the ones I've used anyway, there may be other types, but the ones I've tried are basically pencils that you put down like a pencil and then add water to it. But they also tend to be more primary colors, right? So here's my blue, here's my green, and yeah, you can mix them, you can blend them. But the beauty of watercolor are those very subtle, nuanced blendings of colors. And you get those, I think, with the water soluble tubes of paint or the ink. So I typically don't use them, but that's not to say others don't. You know, they certainly have their place, I would think, especially in travel. But that's good. Are there other questions?
Is it possible that you can explain stretching of the paper a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. So you don't want to have the paper buckle, and so you want to make sure that it's stretched tight before you start putting washes down. So there's a couple ways you can do that. One, you can buy the block of watercolor paper, which again is like this. You can see the black glue on it. Okay, and then afterwards, I just take a knife and slice off one sheet. Okay, but if I've already sliced off a sheet, or if I'm using a loose piece of paper, then what I want to do is I want to take the paper, I want to put it in a basin, just a clean bathtub. Run an inch of water in the bottom of it so that your watercolor paper can get into the bottom of the water, and you just kind of move it like this. You don't have to leave it in there very long. 30 seconds, 20 seconds is enough. You're just basically letting the water soak into the paper a little bit. Then you hold it up, let the water drain off, and put it then on a piece of plywood like this, and just staple into the plywood, working your way around. Okay, or you can take a piece of tape, like 2-inch masking tape, and put that down. The bigger the paper, I think the more important it is to staple it or use really heavy tape, because it will move. And I don't know if you, let me see, here's I'm looking for a place that's stretched, a place that ripped here, but you can see that, here are the staple holes and they actually move. Those staples rip, or the paper rips around the staples. So you find out, after you wet the paper, you let it dry. And when it dries, the edges of the paper are going to curl up. So you've got the staple and then the edge lifts and curls. And that's when you've got a good taut situation here. If you don't see that curl outside of the staples, then something didn't get stretched right. Of course, if you tape it down, you're not going to see the curling at the edge because the tape is covering it. But either will work. But it is very important to do that. And if you don't do that, then your washes are going to cause the paper to buckle. And when it dries, it will never return to a flat condition. It will always have that buckle in there, that waviness in the surface of the paper. When you're done with the painting, you can just take, I usually just take like a knife and wiggle it underneath the staple and pry it up a little bit, and then just take pliers and pull it out. So that's how I would remove the staples. And as far as how far apart the staples would go, these are farther apart than I typically would do, but I'd say every, couple inches, working my way around is plenty. And again, the bigger the paper, the more important it is to actually have it, really secure on side, because that paper will tug outward, or excuse me, inward, and it's going to want to pull free from the staples. I've actually had staples that got pulled out of the wood because the paper was pulling so hard. Now, I didn't have the staple in all the way. That was my fault, but it really shows you how much that paper can move. But good questions. Any other questions?
I have some questions. You want to wait until you're done, or is this a good time to ask more?
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask. Sure. Why don't you do another one?
And anybody watching, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to just put your messages in there and we'll ask Craig. I have two more.
Okay.
Notice that you are using 4 gradients of ink. Is there a maximum or minimum amount of gradients to use?
No, I think you want 3 to me, though, feels like it's too obvious where the horizons are. 4 starts to blend those a little bit better. So that's why I like 4. Any more than that, I don't know. You start to, the increments are so small, because this isn't an engineering or, laboratory exercise. You're not going to have such fine tolerances between them. You just need to have a step of some sort. And if there's more than 4, then in my mind, it starts to, they almost become the same, and I would rather mix and make the gradients on the paper than having a perfect gradient series in the paint wells. Because also when you're dealing with color, like right now we're doing monochrome of ink, but let's say I was doing a painting that had blues and reds and yellows, and I've got washes of all those. If I had 5 or 6 or 7 of each color, that's a lot of ink wells or paint wells that I'm trying to keep, working on my desk. So I think I would say 3 or 4 is a sweet spot for me. 4 is probably where I usually end up.
And here's one last one.
Okay.
For stretching the paper, do you start stapling at the center and then work to the corners?
It doesn't really matter because the paper is also uniformly wet. I start in the corners just to keep track of it. And I put one right in, on the ends of both here. So I'll go back to this view. You can see right here, I've got a staple on both, on both sides of that corner. And then I go from there. But it's going to take, like when I do a rendering where I've had to stretch my own paper, I'll also stretch it at the night before I really want to start painting, because it's going to take hours for that paper to dry. If you're taping it, you can tape dry paper down, and it will, you can start working on it right away. Okay. So that is something to consider too. If you're going to have to start your rendering, like you're doing it for a school project or something, and you're short on time, you probably don't want to stretch it using water and staples. You want to tape it down so you can get right into it. But a bigger painting might have some difficulty doing that. All right. Let me go to this now. We talked about the analytique. And I want to just quickly, while I'm waiting for some of these paints to dry, just go over some of the materials too that I would recommend. These 4 books are excellent resources for this type of work. Harbison's book was republished a few years ago, about 10 years ago, but it was originally written in the early 20s, The Study of Architectural Design. And the reprint has some nice color renditions as well, many from university students done recently. So I think it's a great resource, and it really talks a lot in depth about how to do the wash renderings. McGoodwin's book really is also excellent. It's republished by AIA Press, and McGonigal's has been out of print for a long time, but I think you can get it on Amazon as a reprint, which means basically they make a Xerox copy of it for you. But it's not really about the pictures. McGonigal's book is about the text. And so the Xerox probably is fine. I've not purchased it that way, but it probably is okay. And then Dupuy's book is a Dover publication, and Greek and Roman architecture and classic drawings, excellent illustrations of these final renderings. So these 4 make an excellent library to go over what we're talking about today. I wanted to talk about Harbison's book here just for a couple minutes. One of the series of pages that I really like is his diagrams of analytiques and showing successful and less successful compositional frameworks for these, how different components or elements can be combined into an analytique. These 2 that I've outlined in red, he shows later on in the book as full illustrations. And you can see here some of the example of what I was talking about of building up layers or separating the planes. Because remember, there are no perspectives in these analytiques. They're all, there may be false perspectives like this elevation right here that has a perspectival foreground in it. But basically, it's an elevation. And it's then brought or separated by these other elevations that come forward. But look at the juxtaposition of light and dark, or light against dark and dark against light. So you see these all over throughout these paintings, and the reflected light or the reflected shadows underneath the overhangs and what that can do. If you think back to the photograph that I showed of that porch, those shadows were dark, right? The photograph doesn't render the nuance that you actually see with your eyes. And that's what we're trying to render here with these illustrations. So just looking here, this would be an example of before doing the detail on this urn, it was rendered as an overall cylinder. So we've got a light area here and a dark area here, and the overall cylinder would be rendered first, and then the detail would be rendered on top of that. Okay, here's another 2 examples and more developed illustrations of that. But you can see how the different framing devices work, and these are just so imaginative in terms of how the illustrator, the designer was thinking about the space and the materials and how they would be combined, looking at sections and elevations and plan views, all working together. But this isn't your standard orthographic projection, right? This isn't your plan side and front. This is really an illustration that evokes a quality and of an environment. He also goes into more detail about what makes a non-successful layout. So he's talking about some specific things, and then points to those with little arrows to demonstrate why, in his opinion, they're not so successful. I'm sure you can always find an example that breaks the rule, right? That does a good job, but this is a great place to start. And I think there's a lot of really good instruction in this book. McGoodwin's book, this is the Architectural Shade and Shadows, has a lot of descriptive geometry where it shows actually how to cast the shadows from elevations against a perpendicular wall, and then pairs that with plaster cast photographs to see what's really happening photographically. So this is also an excellent resource, highly recommended. And both those books have been reprinted and they're available. This is a McGonigal's book, and you can see here that the drawings are very basic, but they just help in a value sense, understanding what's happening to light as it bounces off surfaces and lightens objects. And then he gives examples, but I think there's like 10 illustrations in the whole book. This is really about the text. And it's very useful it talks about how to do the mother wash, how to create your different values, how much pigment to put in each one, etc. So if you're looking for a very thorough description of that, Harbison and McGonigal would both do that. And then Dupuy's book, just is you've got the mother wash. This is the mother load of outstanding examples. And if you're interested in this kind of illustration, you've got to get this book. And again, it's relatively inexpensive off of Amazon. And then one more thing I want to point out, Pencil Points was the old architecture magazine. And back in the 20s and 30s, it was just filled with illustrations like this. And as examples of ateliers, US-based work, different, McKim, Mead, and White, they're all, represented. All those firms are represented in this, and they're just fantastic illustrations. So if you're able to get older copies of Pencil Points, then that is a really good resource as well. All right. So let's jump back here into this and put my hand on it here. It's feeling, actually, it still feels a little bit damp. So I'm a little bit leery of just jumping in. And this is one thing too. You can't rush this. Well, you can. Let me take that back. If I had my hair dryer here, yeah, you can rush it that way. But I like to let the water just dry naturally and let it be thoroughly dry before I put that next wash on it. But let me see here, maybe before I do that, I'll go back to this wash here. All right, let's do one more of these. Julie, are there any more questions while I'm running through another wash here?
We do. You mentioned color. Do you have a recommendation for a basic palette of colors?
Yeah, if you're using, I think let's start with the warms. So the reds, I would like kind of alizarin crimson, and a cadmium red or cad red are both very good reds that work well with other paints. They're good mixing paints. The cadmium is going to be more opaque. If there's opacity in a transparent watercolor, the cadmiums will give you that. But alizarin crimson is a really good mixing red for this type of work. In the yellows, a yellow ochre or raw sienna will work. It's not a bright yellow like an Aurelian or a New Gamboge, but it'll be a nice earth tone yellow, if you will, and they're excellent for mixing, especially mixing greens. Greens out of the tube have a tendency to be garish, and so I like to mix my own greens. And so that's where your blues and yellows working together do the trick. And speaking of blue, if you're going to get blue, I'd start with a cobalt blue, and French ultramarine would be a close second. So I think those three would be excellent, building blocks. And from there, if you're doing earth tones, you'd want to be doing a burnt sienna. That would be your brick colors. And then a burnt umber would be a very dark brown. A Van Dyke brown also gives you a nice dark brown. Other blues you might want to consider would be a cerulean blue, which tends to be more opaque, but that's really good for skies. It's that light Italian sky, blue sky that you're going to get in Venice. So seeing that, that light blue cerulean is really useful. And then I mentioned New Gamboge, which is a nice yellow. It's a muted yellow, so it's not garish, but it works really well. Indigo is a very dark blue, but it works well when you're trying to push your blue values darker. And then neutral tint, which is it's kind of like a Payne's gray, which is another neutral that you could use. But I like neutral tint because it tends to work really well with the cobalt. I almost think of it as a darker cobalt. So a lot of times my blues will work from a cobalt into that neutral tint, which kind of has a bluish purple cast to it. I don't like my shadows to be gray. Shadows have much too much life and color in them to mute them with a gray. So my shadows tend to be purplish, and there's sometimes a little bit of heat where that reflected light is bouncing, like on the underside of an eave. So if I'm doing a shadow in color, it might be a transition, let's say, where it's lighter in value. It might also be a raw umber, and then get darker in value and transition from the raw umber into, let's say, a Windsor violet with maybe a little bit of indigo in there as well. And using those as a way to transition not only value, but color or hue is a very effective means of getting color. So I think I've probably mentioned about a dozen colors there, 10 to 12. And that's, I think, a good number, you could buy hundreds of tubes of paint, but there's no need to. Most of these, you know, if you got your primaries, you can mix most of the other colors you want. But in my travel kit, I think I have 12 colors, and the ones that I mentioned are pretty much in there. But in my box of colors here at home, I probably have 20 or 30, because, you know, you go into an art store and you can't contain yourself, and you got to buy a couple, and you got to test it. And but you keep coming back to the same tried and true, you learn your own palette. And I think that's one thing to emphasize here, especially when you're working in color. Each artist is going to figure it out for themselves. You can watch me, you can watch others. I mean, you go on the internet, there's a gazillion different, really talented artists doing fine work, but nobody has the same palette. Nobody has the same tools. And the takeaway from that is you have to figure out what works for you. But the good news is that there are a lot of different ways to get to really good results. There isn't one secret formula that, no one's told me about, so I'm never going to be a good painter. That's not true. You just have to be willing to invest the hours and learn. Other questions?
Okay, one more.
Okay.
True Beaux-Arts tradition, were they limited to 3 primary colors and mixed secondaries accordingly?
Color really wasn't used. They were India ink. They were done entirely in monochrome. So this would be your palette, and getting darker. Now the inks that they would use to draw, sometimes there would be a hint of color, and they would flavor. Sometimes they would flavor the ink with a little bit of either cobalt and ultramarine to push it back, or add a little bit of alizarin to the value or maybe burnt sienna to bring it forward. But we're talking about just a little bit, just to tinge it and warm it or cool it. It wouldn't look like it was red or blue. But the inks that they would use to draw the limits of things, they would sometimes use a blue ink in a ruling pen. And I'm not sure that I'll get far enough in my painting to use this, so let me use this as an opportunity to show this. This is a ruling pen, and this would be one of those things that if you've got a compass set, you might see this in there and you're like, what in the world do I use this for, right? But what I do is fill it with paint, right? And then I'm going to get my straight edge here, clean off the back. Okay, this is an inking triangle, so it's not going to bleed underneath. All right, and I'm looking for a dry place here where I can put my triangle down. Okay, so I'm going to use this now as a line. Okay, so you can see I get a very fine line there. And that is super useful when you're going to draw shadows on mullions, let's say on windows, or you're going to draw very fine detail of some sort of brick detail or anything like that, railings, let's say, you could do that. And what's nice about this too is while it's still wet, I can come back in with a brush and I'm going to add a little bit more value to it, because it tends to, so I'm just using my brush here, but I've turned it, and let me even go darker here, use my, okay, so what's happening now is I took my full ink, it's not diluted mother wash, it's the actual ink, and I just touched the end of it here, of that line that I had done with a ruling pen, and while it was still moist, I just touched it here and it bled uphill as far as it would go, and it graded very nicely. So I can do a nice graded wash with a ruling pen and a fine brush. And that's an excellent resource as well. So I would say the ruling pen is a great tool. You don't use it on every painting, every illustration, but when you need it, it's great to have it available. All right, so if you're going to use color, though, I don't, this gets into color theory, which maybe would be an entirely different seminar or webinar. But the idea of don't use every color in the crayon box, right? And also try to use colors that kind of underlie or create a consistency throughout. Let me do one more wash here, and then I've got a couple more pictures that I want to show, which will address some of these color questions. But I think this one's ready here. Let's try another wash on this before I have to leave it. All right, so I'm going to start with clear water again. And now I'm going to bring that clear water even. You know what? I'm going to stop on, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to blot it off. So here you go. This is, right, you're seeing it in real time here. If you want to stop something, just blot it off. I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to come over to here because I think seeing me render this might be useful. Okay, so this barrel vault right here, what I'm going to do this is, I got to move a couple things because my table's cramped with cameras and everything else. All right, but let's, actually, I'll leave it this way. Okay, I want to use a fine brush, right? And I want to, as my value study said, I want to have it light here and I want to have it dark as it comes down, but I don't want to bring that dark all the way down. So it's going to work fairly light on this, and not light, but fairly dry. Okay, it's moist, but not super wet. So the paper around it is dry enough that I can introduce water and it's not bleeding into these areas here. Okay, so that's important. But I want to get a little bit of water going here. And the other thing I'm going to do is extend it into this area here. And this is because, if you recall, this frame is really dark. And I want anything that I do to bleed into here as well to make it darker. It can only be darker than this. So anything I put here, I want to bleed into the frame. So this goes back to that idea of chess again, right? I'm thinking about how I want to build up values in successive layers. All right, now I'm about ready to go here. I've got this, and I'm going to come in with the darker wash, okay? And I'm going to start down here where it's dry. All right, I'm going to bring that up, and now with regular water, just clear water, I'm going to just soften that edge and bring it right up into my other, the clear water, all right? And I'm going to soften the bottom here as well. And I'm going to bring it down to, excuse me, where this shadow is on the underside here. All right, let me add a little bit of value here. Okay, and then I'm going to bring it out all the way down as part of this border. So this border is going to keep getting darker. And every time I do a wash, if I cover this border, it will just naturally build up. You can see what's happening here. I'm going to run the same thing across the bottom now. Just run this. And because this is always going to be the darkest thing, I can stop here. And then later, when I want to do things here, I'll just keep those washes coming down into this border. But now I've got a graded wash on the border, and I've started to highlight how this, this roof is going to work. Okay, so this barrel vault is starting to get rendered here. All right. All right, let me go back to this and look at this. So this is my setup of, this is the bigger view of the table. And this is the painting I'm going to talk about now. But you can see kind of just how things are laid out here. This is my two waters, my wells of paint, my brushes laid off to the side. And I should have mentioned this too. My brushes are on a little, actually it's a little rubber pad that you'd put under a bar of soap. It keeps the soap from sitting in water. Okay, but it's got little rubber feet on it, and it lifts my brushes up off the table. So you really want to keep your brushes well, in good shape. You can see they're laid out flat here on top of that. You never, ever, ever stick them in the water here, just like bristles down. Absolutely not. I'd wrap your knuckles if I saw that happen. Just kidding. But you really don't want to do that. These brushes are expensive, and when you get professional quality brushes, you can spend hundreds of dollars on some of them. You really don't want to mess them up. So take care of your brushes, but they last 20 years or more. So anyway, here's the layout, and I just want to walk you through the process of this. I mentioned the Queen's Gambit earlier. I watched the movie series a couple times. I loved it. And I was inspired to do what I call the classicist gambit. And I thought, what if I could do some sort of chess set that would be designed that I would render as an analytique. And so just, working with historical precedents and examples and a Pompeian tile study here in the back and how it might be framed out. Janus was my bishop in the middle here, and my rook, pawn, queen, king, and knight off to the side here. And then this was the pencil work. And you can see, well, maybe you can see, I didn't have a scanner that could do it all. I do it in pieces. But Janus and the rook have changed design. And I changed it after I had already drawn it. And so I had to erase a lot of pencil work in the middle, and that really abused the paper. It really damaged the paper fibers. But I was like, I don't care. I want to really change the design here. And so I got into it. I erased it, knowing that building up the washes would hide a lot of the old line work that I didn't want to emphasize. But it was going to be a struggle to work with that damaged paper fiber anyway, when you erase that much. And when I talk about erasing, I'm talking about using a kneaded eraser. I don't use a pink eraser or a white eraser. A kneaded eraser to pull, like art gum, to pull the graphite off the paper is what you want to use. So this is an early wash. I've done flat washes several times here. The value of each wash would be about the top here of the king. So this would be my first wash. But you can see I've done several washes since then. These two stripes around the outside are taped off. So that's using that medical tape that I talked about earlier, taking a straight edge and an X-Acto knife, cutting it to the width that I needed, and then laying it over these stripes after I had put down a couple washes already. So I know that the value of the color or the value of the paint underneath this tape is darker already than this. I don't want it to be so bright that it distracts from this, but I do want it lighter than what's on either side of it. So I'm adding the tape halfway into the drawing or into the painting. The smoke coming out of the brazier here is this flame is done by bringing a flat wash up to roughly this point and then quickly transitioning from value to clear water and doing that several times in this band. And then occasionally, like right in here, taking the value that's on the background and interspersing it in the middle. So it looks like, it's in the middle of two wisps of smoke that are rising. So that's what's happening here. So this is early on, but I'm establishing my planes, remember? So I have my background, my midground, my foreground, and I haven't put any paint at all, any ink on the knight or this part of the rook. I put a little bit on this side. This is a bridge abutment. So this is a triangular foundation coming toward us, and so to split the water around it in the river. And so this side is not going to receive light, and this side is going to receive light. So that's what's happening here. So my next layer, I've started now to develop from the middle over to the right. So the bishop, the pawn, the queen, and the rook are basically finished here. The horse or the knight and the king have yet to be done. And you can see here that the wash is not as graded as I would like on the king. This is that damaged paper I was talking about. It was not letting me move the ink to the extent that I wanted to. It was kind of almost like a paper towel. You put ink on it and it sticks. It doesn't really move as well as you want. So it's a real struggle. You have to work a little drier there than you'd want to. And so then this is the next wash here, pulling all these different values together. My tape has been removed off of these places, around the perimeter. I still have it on the outer side. You can see the staples too across the top. They're about 2 inches apart. So you can see those. And then when I remove the tape and I square it up and the final tweaks are done, this is what the final rendering looks like. And the lettering, I talked about the analytique and the lettering that goes with it. So I've got the knight, king, bishop, pawn, queen, and rook, which was a subtle allusion to SPQR, the ancient motto of Rome, BPQR on this. So I know it's far-fetched and it's a stretch, but it was my nod to ancient Rome using a chess set and the text, and it's deep, I know, but whatever. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you though. As far as the paper fibers, this is a photograph of the backside of the paper. So this is a reverse image looking through, it's backlit, I'm looking toward light, and you can see these dark areas here. This is what actually happens to the paper fibers. When you erase it so much, and the paint has absorbed into those fibers at these locations. Okay, so you can see there was a lot of damage here in the paper, as well as pinpricks. These are compass holes that, compass points in the center of every circle. When I go back one, you don't see those as much, but the edges of the paper fibers are holding on to that ink, and that's what you're seeing in that, in this picture. All right. And then this this drawing here, now I'm going to switch gears. There were a couple paintings that were done as, they were part of the announcement of this presentation. And this was the other one. This one was done in color. So I want to just point out a couple things, kind of the differences between color and, monochrome or ink work. But this is a value study, so done in a similar way as I described before. Did a pencil drawing. This is 18 by 24, so it's a larger, almost a full sheet. A full sheet of watercolor paper is 22 by 30. So this is coming in about 2 inches each direction to an 18 by 24, which is an easily frameable size. So, and that's something to keep in mind too. If you're going to be framing things, if you work to mat sizes, then you don't have to buy so many custom mats or do it yourself. But anyway, I drew this in ink over the pencil work and then did a red pencil value study just to help me remember that I want this area to be the lightest and where I want dark against light areas or light against dark, and how that might move through the painting. And then this is an early wash. This is the first one, and you can see it's a little bit out of light here, but this area down here, these are the 4 colors that I was using for this first wash. So this is the yellow ochre, cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, and then this is a mix of the blue and the crimson to make a purple. And so these 4 colors are added. So it's pure water, white up at the top, that's preserving my white. And then you're working through the yellows, the reds, the blues, and the purples as I move my way down. But there were also little bits of tape, that medical tape that I put on some of the columns down here to preserve pure white areas of these columns, okay? So this is moving into the painting a little bit, and you can see that I've started to develop this center passage here, the plan view, and then the column looking up at the capital, as well as the order on the side. And this is just a midpoint of that, but you can see the shade and shadow is being cast, the relative values are being set. And once I have these dark areas, I don't want to keep working over the top of them. I've set the dark that I want here, and so I'm not going to put another wash over that. That's going to loosen this or lighten it. So I want to keep that going. This is a detail of the same stage of the painting, looking at the area that's relatively finished. But one of the things I want to point out are these light white areas on the columns, and those were covered. That's where the tape came in. And you can see here, like this background tree worked right over and created the shadow on this column, and then created the tree on the other side, and then knitted behind this column. So this is starting to be a little bit more artistic in terms of how shapes are used in a painting. If you've done any more traditional watercolor or even oil painting, you know that you paint shapes, not objects. And this is an example of that in this type of watercolor, where I'm trying to take the shape of shadow and object and run them together so that it's more of a harmonious backdrop, and it's not meant to be a column sitting in front of a tree. That will come through, but I want to leave something for the viewer to fill in the blank, right? To add more information. So this is starting to make the transition from a pure analytique or pure Beaux-Arts rendering and combining it with something you might do in a what I'll call traditional watercolor painting, or even if you were doing plein air, you might take this approach. Okay, now this is several steps later, but you can see the overall palette again, how it sits on the table. But look at what's happening on the left side here. Okay, this is an example of what happens when those staples pull out. And actually, the paper was so wet and so strong, it pulled 4 staples out of the middle here. And I had to come back in with heavy duty staples while it was in progress, staple it down. But I always have these ripples here, these little bit, and when I side light it, you can see these little shaded areas that you don't see on the right side. You know, this side over here, the staples were all in place, but over here I had it. So, you know, when it's matted and framed, you don't really see that, but it's always there. You can't get away from that. But the colors here, these are the umbers. This is the dark burnt umber that's in there, but also you know, some of the burnt siennas in here, making my own greens, and then using some different brushes that I haven't really talked about yet, but some brushes that are creating really good foliage so that it creates kind of a lifelike effect for that. And then here again is the cleaned up version of that. Okay. Any questions, Julie? How are we doing on that?
We're doing good. We have about 10 minutes left. So if anybody has questions, I have a couple.
Okay.
Can you give the name of the medical tape you used again, the brand and name of it?
Yeah, sure. And let me, I'm just gonna go back to this so I can actually show you. It's 3M Micropore is what it's called. But it's very thin, but you'd use it like to put a wrap on around a wound, not to be too graphic, but the idea is that air can still get to somebody's skin. So it allows air movement, but it doesn't allow moisture through, and it's not abusive. It's like the stickiness of it is kind of like a Post-it note, so it's easily removed, which is awesome. And I can cut it very easily. You know, I'll stretch it on my plywood and take an X-Acto knife and a straight edge, and I can cut really fine slivers of this and put it right on my paper, and then use my X-Acto and basically lift the tape, and it'll tear right where my X-Acto knife is. So I can come around and add a lot of those, you know, pieces if I want to. Now, there's kind of a point of diminishing returns, right? I mean, it's probably better to do more with just carefully cutting with your brush, cutting around objects. But some objects are so small, and if you know that it's going to be very difficult to preserve an area of white in the middle of a painting because it's so wet and you've got so many things going on, sometimes it's nice to just drop that tape on and just put your wash right over the tape. You don't even have to worry about it, and then you just peel it off later. So that's kind of how I use that.
Okay, how would you recommend brushes be stored when not in use?
They come oftentimes with a little plastic cylinder that just slides over the tip of the brush. Like when you buy it, it should be there. And I keep those. So what I do is after I'm done painting, you know, I wash it on either side, get it nice and clean. Then I'll just take my fingers and make sure that the bristles are nice and you know, pointed. You know, so I'll get it back to this point here. Come on, focus. Anyway, you probably get the idea. Now it won't focus close. It only focuses back. Anyway, it's got a mind of its own. When it's at this stage, then I just put the little case over it, but I still leave it out in the air, you know, meaning I don't put it away in a backpack or a cupboard or something. Just leave it overnight so that the water that's still in there can evaporate, but then it's going to be trained. Those bristles are still trained to a point. And then when you, you know, take it out, you slide that case off and, you know, brush, you know, get it in water and it's as good as new. That does remind me, when you buy a new brush, oftentimes there's a little bit of, well, it's basically a fixative on here that a little mild glue that holds the point or holds the brush, the bristles in this shape. So the first time you get a brush, you want to just put it in water and swish it back and forth quite a bit to wash that out. You don't want to just take your fingers and kind of start massaging it. Okay, let the water and the bristles kind of soften and do their own thing. And then you can start to, you know, when you see the bristles floating back and forth or sliding back and forth in the water, then you know you're ready to go. But that's how you kind of break in a brush, and then you store it that way. You know, if it's overnight or something, I just keep it on that little, and here's what I was talking about. This is that little soap stand. And I actually took a little knife and cut some of them out, so that I've got thicker brushes or wider brushes and they can fit in there. But other than that, you know, I can just put my brushes right between these, and it keeps them in a nice position, ready to go off to the side here, but I don't have to worry about, you know, they don't roll off the table or anything like that. So good. Other question?
Okay, is your value study taped down with masking tape?
It depends on how big it is. This one that I did for this drawing, no, I just held it with my left hand and drew ink And then once I had the ink work done, I put my drawing to the side and I was just doing the value study on a white background so I could see true, relative light and dark areas. The larger one that I did was done, it probably was taped down, but it's not so much that I'm worried about it moving, right? It's more about just getting the value down. So the taping is more just so the paper doesn't, because it's trace paper, just so it doesn't bend or wrinkle when I'm working the pencil, pretty hard or pretty fast. Because sometimes your pencil catch and it all of a sudden it accordions on you and it's, oh, shoot. But I think that's why I would tape it down. I don't really care if it moves around a little bit.
Okay, do you have thoughts on using liquid masking fluid?
Yeah, I do. And I use it occasionally. Liquid Frisket is sometimes what it's called too. The one that's Winsor Newton. I've got it right here. So this is an example of it. And it's masking fluid. I get the one that has the color agent added to it so I can see it on the paper. You can get it in like neutral where it doesn't show at all. And this one's kind of a milky off-white. And I like that just so I can see where it is on the painting while I'm doing it so I don't leave it there by accident. And you just take your finger when it's done, you kind of rub it off and it comes right up. You can use art gum too to kind of lift it off if it's really sticky. But what I don't like to use it that much because it's hard to really control and make fine lines out of it. If I'm masking something, it's typically because it's really fine. If it's a big area, I just cut around it. So I wouldn't mask this area off. But if it's really fine, like let's say these metal areas here on this window, I would rather use the tape on that or just be really careful with the right size brush and avoid that. Because it's hard to control. It's kind of gloopy, if that's a word. It kind of, it's like, a bigger bead of it that you have to then kind of very carefully. So it's almost like another art form of carefully applying this this masking fluid. If you do use it, make sure you use a really cheap, bad brush, okay? Do not use a good brush on that because it will ruin it. And what I do with masking fluid is I get another bottle here. So this is dishwashing liquid, okay, liquid soap. And I dip my brush. This is a cheap brush. I would just like nylon. I would just dip it in the fluid first and then dip it into my masking fluid. What you're doing is coating the bristles here so that the rubber cement, which is basically what that is, doesn't get in the bristles and it makes it difficult to clean. So, and then when I'm done with the fluid, I just take a paper towel and wipe it off and then clean it in water and really get in there and make sure that it's really clean. But this brush might be, $3-4. It's really not a very good brush, but it comes to a point and does its job. And that's really all you need. So yeah, if you're going to use masking fluid, those are a couple things to keep in mind.
Great. How would you go about a very tight graded wash? For example, perhaps the side of a column.
So if it's a tight, meaning, let me go back to that other sheet of paper. This one's probably dry enough here. But if I were going to treat this as a column, I've turned it sideways. And what I might do is work a little bit drier than other washes, right? So because I really don't want the water to move a lot. I want to keep a relative bead right here. In fact, why don't I use this one here? Here's a plan view, right? So if my light is coming in at a 45, this is the light part of the column. This is my column right here in elevation. This is the light side and this is the dark side. So I don't want a lot of easily flowing pigment back and forth. I want to keep a narrow band here of dark that's going to get light as it moves over. So to do that, I might turn the paper sideways like this, okay? And I'm going to take a relatively, not dry, but not a super wet brush either. And why don't we start with the, I'll start with number 3 here. It's not the mother wash. Yeah, I'll start with the mother wash, make it a little bit darker so you can really see it. So I'm going to put that right on here Okay, and it's not as, there's no bead here per se, okay? But what I'm going to do now is match that, and just on the edge of that bead, just barely kiss it with that same, with clear water, okay? And each time I'm dipping my brush in here and moving that paint ever so slightly on either side of it, okay? So this, what's happening here is my dark wash is starting to move very quickly away. And once I have this established, now if you know, take the time, whoops, come on. Take the time to actually focus this, there we go. I might start at the top here where it's clear water and start to introduce some of these other pigments. Now I'm going to be in trouble here because this is already dry or drying, and I'm introducing color or wet, but I'm just doing this to show what I'm trying to do on the next wash. Okay, I'm starting to build like I did down here where I'm doing the graded wash. That's what I'm doing here. I'm starting light and I'm moving into 1, 2, and then I'm going to get right into this this mother wash part. Okay, now it's going to want to get darker up here, but I can hit that later by turning the whole painting over and working light to dark right here. So that's something that you can think about too, is you don't have to do everything all in the same wash. You can start to you know, break it into smaller pieces and do it as you you know, do it in a couple different steps or stages. Okay. And you can see here a little bit of banding, and in the camera it looks more obvious than it does here, but you can see like a horizon where I'm stepping between different levels or different layers. But on the back side here, I don't want to be a very wet brush. I want to just be enough to moisten it, clean my brush, dry it off, and then finish out all the way to the bottom here and let that move. Now, this wash, talking and painting this, isn't doing much credit to it, but the idea is that I'm bringing a relatively dry or not wet wash here and grading it on both sides. And after that's dry, then doing light all the way through this dark again, and then on the back. You can see here too, and maybe there's some little light areas where it's almost a dry brush. My brush was so dry that it didn't leave a consistent wash there. And so that's actually a dry brush technique, which you can use. I don't think I would use it on a column, but that's what's happening. And that is something to maybe, you know, keep in mind when you want to use it. You know, see if I can do that here. Like that, there's dry brush. So that might be useful for, you know, reflecting off of pavement, let's say, you know, where you get that type of effect. Or I'll show this as well. This is a different type of brush. But if you look at the point, you can see that it's kind of cut. It's thin, but then there's a bigger area on the back here which holds more moisture. But the effect of this is pretty interesting. You get, as it starts to dry, you get a very nice kind of a natural way to get foliage, right? So you start to see these areas where it'd be very difficult to kind of intentionally do those, but you get some nice random open areas and some other areas. Once you have that, I would still kind of pay attention to what you have there, and maybe while it's drying, you can come back in with a regular brush and some other wash, or even some of the ink where it's really dark, and just touch it in a few places, kind of and you can see that it's moving there, and it's going to be giving you a very nice graded wash, you know, when it's all done, as far as foliage, kind of highlight areas or dark areas working around. So even though while it's wet like this, but it's not really, it's just damp, it's not wet, and I've got basically a moist, well-loaded brush, I can just touch it to some of these areas here, and it will be just the right amount of water to move slowly without giving me a big run back area, which is something that I haven't really mentioned, but it is something you generally try to avoid. And that is where you've got a wet area that's just moist, and you put a very wet brush on it and it's lifting up pigment and causing, when it dries, it'll give you kind of a ridge line. And if you've done any watercolor, you probably know what I'm talking about, because everybody does it, when you're learning. Yeah. So any other questions?
Okay, here's your last question.
Okay.
It's two parts. Do you pencil in directly on your stretched paper? And have you experimented with transferring the final pencil drawing onto the watercolor paper? If so, what works well?
So generally, I don't draw after it's stretched. I draw before it's stretched. So it's easy to, I use a parallel bar, but however you like to draft, you can do that, just paper taped down, and get it nice. And then what you can do at that point, once it's drawn, then you stretch it. If you want to draw on it after you've stretched it, I find that the paper has changed a little bit. It's some of the sizing, which is what they call to stiffen the paper and keep it from absorbing everything. Some of that sizing has been actually removed, and it takes graphite a little differently, and it's not as crisp as it is when you draw. So I try to do all my drawing before I stretch it, and then stop there. If I need to transfer a very complex drawing, though, you can use a light table, or the one I've been working on today. I drafted that one. But either of those will work well. You can also use some sort of like document camera and project down and draw that way if you want to. So those are all methods. I wouldn't typically use like a transfer method, like let me take that back. I mean, I've done rubbings on the back of trace paper, turn it over, draw on it, and then remove the trace paper and draw again. But that tends to have a different graphite quality than just drawing directly on it. It leaves a little bit more graphite sediment on the paper. So I don't like that different line quality. I try to do all the drawing actually drafted on, and before I stretch.
Craig, I have one more thing. Somebody put in a chat that they would be interested in, another class with you online where we'd have some sort of participation.
Yeah.
And, I just wanted to put that out there for while people are still on. If that's in the future, to get might be a smaller class, but where we'd have the ability for people to show their work and you to comment on it.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be exciting. And really give people a chance to put into practice what they're observing here, because there is no substitute for practice, right? And I assume most people that are on the webinar today have tried this, and I know some are very accomplished and have a lot of experience already. So, but yeah, you have to learn these things through practice, and I think that kind of seminar or session would be really a great way to do that. So, are there any other questions, or are we? I think we're over 4 o'clock. So
Yeah. I think we there's one more. I think you addressed this before. Something about someone mentioned, can they draw with a 2B or 4B pencil? I know you mentioned the lighter H.
Yeah, in fact, I go 2H instead of 2B, but that's for the value studies. Knock yourself out. Use whatever Bs you want. 4B, 6B. But for actually drafting, I get into compass work and stuff like that. I enjoy the precision drafting of that, and so something a little bit harder works well for me. 2H is nice.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Craig. This has been, 2 hours went by really fast. And I've seen we've got a lot of great feedback. I think people enjoyed this presentation. And looking forward to maybe getting another chance to do this with you and have some participation from the.
Well, thanks. It's been a pleasure and great to get the paints out and share this. Like I said, it's been a lifelong, career-long interest. And I'll get this PowerPoint deck over to you guys, and you can distribute it, through the channels. And I'll try to finish this rendering too, so you can see kind of how it progressed and kind of where it ended up.
Yeah, so we'll have this available. I'm not sure how quickly, but Julie will get this uploaded so that we'll have a recording, and we'll have a recording available, as well as your deck, your PowerPoint presentation. So great. Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and I think everyone might have a little shoveling to do here in Chicago, so at some point. So, all right, take care. Thank you.
Yeah.